For coming out tonight. I also want to just welcome you to this event and say a very big thank you to our broadcasting students who had this idea, this vision to present this program focusing on mental health. We all know that mental health is a serious issue, and here at Huntington University we value the holistic health of our students, and mental health is a part of that. And so I am so excited to be here tonight to witness some of this. This is worthy of credit, so you get credit by participating in this. So that is awesome and amazing. But I want to start off by praying, and then we're going to get right into this program, okay? So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the heart of these students who had the vision to put this together. They are on the ground level with their peers, and they understand the impact and the challenges that very meaningful questions so that we can help each other, help become better and more healthy. And so, Father, we give you this night. We give you this event. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelsey Darmowchel, and I'm a therapist in the area. I work in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I own Positive Perceptions, LLC. I'm the owner of that business, and I'm a therapist. I became a therapist by getting So the World Health Organization, I feel like they're pretty good experts on the subject too, says that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So the World Health Organization says health is not just about our bodies. It says it's about our brains and about how we connect with others too. When you think about health, when you think of our media's representation of health, usually we think of people who are muscular and fit and pushing through some really extreme circumstance, like participating in the Olympics or being in the NFL. But the reality is sometimes that depiction is not healthy. Sometimes it can be. Grit and resilience can be a good thing, but if we're pushing our bodies too hard and we're not seeing the other aspects, we can really do damage. So to look a little deeper, the brain is an organ in our body. I'm sure all of you have heard that in high school biology, if not before. And many of you probably heard that the reason we have a brain is so that it can keep us balanced and help us organize things and learn and grow. But the reality is our brain has one major overarching purpose. And that overarching purpose is to keep you safe. The way that the brain keeps us safe is by taking in all of this sensory information that we have and turning it into a story. And then we take that story and we decide, is this a space where we can connect with other people, where we can be safe to voice our thoughts and opinions? Or is this a place where we need to be a little more on guard? Is this a place where we need to get out of here as fast as possible because it's dangerous? And when we're in that fear state, not running away, if you're not fighting off the bad thing that's presented in front of you, you freeze up. The best way I can explain that is like a possum playing dead. Or you fawn. You say what you need to say to get out of that situation. And that one can really do a number on us after the fact, because the things that we might say or do might go against our values. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Our job's purpose is to keep us safe. Our job's purpose is to keep us safe. So when a brain is mentally healthy and it's doing those things to keep us safe, we have some really cool side effects that happen. One of those is learning. One of those is connecting. One of those is being able to fall in love. One of those is being able to really connect with our Creator. There are so many different awesome things that happen when we're being healthy. You can express, feel, and manage positive and negative emotions. You know what to do when you're having a bad day. You know how to handle a loss when you're grieving. You can form healthy relationships with others in your life, and you can have conversations with them that might be uncomfortable and know that you'll both be okay. You can expand yourself. You can challenge yourself. And when you have an uncomfortable thought or a feeling, you can push into it a little bit and explore where that belief came from so that you know if that's really your true value or if it's just a lesson that you got along the way that isn't really a message you want to continue. So, I'm sure many of you have heard stress is bad. Stress is bad for your body. Our doctors tell us all the time, try to do things to reduce your stress. But we don't really hear a whole lot about why stress is bad. In the short term, stress is bad because it makes our heart beats faster, it makes our muscles feel tight, it messes with our digestion. Sometimes we feel like we have to run to the bathroom all the time. Other times things just kind of slow down. It increases our cortisol level, which increases our inflammation, which makes it so that we aren't as resilient to fighting off different illnesses. It also is really easy to become stressed if you don't have great social supports, because the way I like to teach this to my clients is it's like we all have a little stress thermometer inside us, and the little hassles throughout the day add a degree. And those little hassles can be things as small as, oh shoot, I forgot to wash the shirt that I wanted to wear and I have to wear a different one. Or, wow, my roommate left a lot of dishes in the sink today and I don't want to have to be the one to do them, but there they are. And those can add up, or they can be big things, like I don't know how I'm going to pay my tuition. I don't know how I'm going to get enough food to make it through next week. And then those add a little bit more to it, but each little hassle that we go through, each little stressor that we have adds up and it adds up and it adds up. And the way that we bring it back down is by connecting with other people, by doing self-care activities, and those don't have to be indulgent. Those are just things like making sure that you're taking a shower, making sure that you're drinking enough water, making sure that you are doing things that you find enjoyable, making sure that you're living to your values. And that brings that thermometer back down. Because if we're in a state where our thermometer has gotten high and we can bring it back down, that's okay. That's a pretty normal, healthy function. But if we're to a point where that thermometer has gotten so high that we can't bring it down easily, and we're staying in that level of stress for a long time, then we start to see things like increased risk of heart attack, stroke, hypertension, arrhythmias. We start to see an increased risk for autoimmune diseases, things that become even more hassles and more stressors and just turn it into this big cycle, which then puts us at risk for little accidents becoming more deadly. You're increasing your chance of getting in a car accident. You're increasing your chance of having an accident at work. You're increasing your risk of having an accident even just at home because you're distracted and you can't think clearly and your body can't do what it needs to do to keep you safe. So here I've got two pictures. I talked a tiny bit earlier about how we take in information. So we have the big five senses, right? Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. We also have vestibular, which means how we balance, and proprioceptive, how we feel our internal sensory experiences. So when you've eaten something, you can tell if you're full. You might get, a little bit of like rumbling, grumbling going on. You feel that. You know what's going on in your body and what you need to do to either make it more comfortable or be able to move forward and do what you want to do throughout the day. And all of this information comes into our bodies all at once, and our brain has a filter. And for many of us, it does a really good job of filtering out information that we need to know versus information that we don't. But if you have something like an anxiety disorder or PTSD, your filter gets a little bit less effective. If you have something like a learning disability or ADHD or autism spectrum, that filter gets a little less effective too. So then more information is coming in. And instead of your brain just throwing out the information that it doesn't need, it hangs on to that. And it uses more energy to process it. And then it makes it harder to do what you want to be doing. This picture over here, figure one, is how we connect and communicate to others. So these nerves, I'm not going to give you the full biology lesson, but what we're looking at here is the vagus nerve, which travels down from our amygdala, where all of our emotions originate, down. It connects to our inner ears. It connects to our throat. So if you've ever felt really guilty and felt like you had that lump in your throat that you couldn't swallow, that's signals from the vagus nerve. It connects to your heart. So rapid heart rate when you're anxious, or if you've just met someone who you think's the love of your life, your heart might skip a beat. It connects to your lungs and your diaphragm, which is why taking deep breaths is so good for you and helps your brain and body relax, because all the other things it's connected to, we can't consciously just make a decision to fix. It connects to our intestines. It connects to our adrenals, so what creates cortisol, stress hormones. and it even connects to our pelvic floor. So we're all connected here, and we're taking in all of this sensory information. And our brain and our body are working together, so we feel our feelings in our body as well as our minds. And when we're in these cranial nerves 5 through 10, they are connecting to that vagus nerve, and they're giving us expressions. So if you've ever had a professor who's just really passionate and excited about what they're teaching, you're going to be able to get to that calm space in your mind, and you connect with them, and you want to do those assignments. You want to learn. You want to grow. But if you have a professor who's just droning on and isn't really into it, they're not projecting those nice connecting expressions that are going to draw you into it. They're just there for the paycheck or whatever their motivator is, and you're just there to finish the credit, and that connection never really happens. So these nerves, they give us our expressions. And while we can learn to muffle our expressions, we always share a little bit of what we're really feeling with others. And it's really a matter of social skills that we go with what a person is saying rather than what they're expressing more often than not. I'm sure you've all had a time where someone's asked you how your day was, and when you reciprocated, they just said, fine. Like, they're not fine, but they don't want to talk about it, so we move on. So how did we get to that point where we don't want to talk about it, so we moved on? Well, it actually started a long, long time ago. But I will focus on the big events that happened here in the US. There's lots of little pieces here and there that vary by culture, but overall, quick majority history of the US. If you were a woman and you stood up to authority in any way, shape, or form, you were at risk of being deemed mentally ill and locked away. So a lot of women learned pretty quickly not to talk to people, especially people who they thought would, go against their beliefs or, subject them to inappropriate treatment. Then for men, we had the soldiers who fought in World War I. And World War I was different than many of the wars and battles fought before that in quite a few ways. But to keep it short, what happened in the US in World War I was that men were not able to process their what used to be called battle fatigue, post-traumatic stress disorder, as a result of being in war. If we look all the way back at Greek and Roman warriors, when they started experiencing these symptoms, they were given time to heal before they were expected to go back into battle. But in World War I, we had a shortage of soldiers, and we had a huge supply and demand issues. So the higher-ups said, how can we motivate men to just get right back into it? And unfortunately, they chose one of the most shame-filled ways they could for the time by saying, okay, if your symptoms are so bad that you need to go home, you must be a latent homosexual. So we'll send you back home with that label. So those men who weren't able to shove it all down went home, and they were heavily stigmatized by their communities. And the men that did shove it all down and managed to survive went home and taught their sons, you don't talk about feelings, that's just for women. You don't talk about feelings, that gets you in trouble. You need to man up. And so this message changed. Many of you might have heard the term toxic masculinity. I prefer the term limited masculinity because that's what really happened there. we told men the only things you're allowed to express now are happiness and joy or anger, and nothing else is acceptable. And after World War I, we kind of had some more history happen. There were some ups and downs, but then we got ourselves to the Great Depression. And this was another big change for mental health, because as we came out of the Great Depression, we had some people who were very resilient and had good coping skills and had good connections and had meshed with their community in a way that helped lift everybody up. And then we had people who were really, really struggling. And what happened was, at the same time, media was infiltrating our world in a rapid and new way, and manufacturing was going up. So media started telling us, hey, if you're not happy, that's okay, because you can purchase this product to buy happiness. And we had all these parents who had struggled, and many of them decided they didn't want their children to struggle, so they started throwing money into it and trying to buy their children happiness and buy their children better lives. And we also had some parents who figured, hey, I struggled really hard, they should have to struggle too. So we got two very separating messages now infiltrating our community about what was normal and what was acceptable to do with our feelings. So when we talk about mental health today, there's a lot of reactions that might come up. And I've listed several here that are all comments that have kind of leached down through the unhealthy history here. We have the false clause fallacy. Well, people in other countries don't get diagnosed with this stuff. It's just a money trap. What do you think about that? No. We get diagnosed because we have the resources to do so. We have the opportunity to do so. All of these here are a variety of either personal bias or thinking errors that we have, because when our brains develop our ability to figure out how to survive in this world, we're still teeny tiny. So we don't do a very good job of organizing those thoughts well, which is part of one of the beauties of being in college, is it gives you an opportunity to start to sort some of that back out a little better. But if you want to have a conversation and you want to be heard, the best way to do it is just keep trying. Make the space as safe for yourself as you can. Make the space as safe as you can for the person you're talking to. That can look like, saying, Mom, Dad, I don't want you to think that I'm crazy, but I'm having some real trouble that I need some help with. What can we do about that? Or it can look like, hey, we've been studying together for a while now, and I'm feeling kind of concerned. I don't want you to be upset by what I'm saying. I just want to help. Would you be willing to go to the counseling center and talk to somebody? There's different ways that we can create that safety to have that conversation. But if we don't talk about it at all, if we just push it down and say nothing, then we're allowing that suffering around us to continue. So, as a result, because of this historical context, we've learned to push things down, to try to avoid them, to try to purchase our way out of it, to hold ourselves to expectations that are too high. I'm really hoping that everyone, especially the men in the audience, feel like they're able to be a part of the conversation here tonight, because in the past 20 years, men have often been very excluded from this conversation, but more than ever, you need to be part of it because you need to have your voice heard and your feelings heard. Today in America, we have pockets of people who are still in survival mode. They're not able to connect well with others. They're struggling to get by. They're struggling with access to food, clean water, shelter, things like that. And right next door, there are people who are struggling for different reasons. They're struggling because of this continuous pressure and anxiety. You wanna move to the next slide? There we go. So what they're struggling with right next door is our brains glitch. We have a little glitch because when we were created, our brain's job to keep us safe was quite a bit easier than it is right now in our world. It was easier because when we were in more small communities, more tribal type clusters, we fit in because of what we could offer to our tribe. We had connections with everybody because there was a much smaller number. You knew everybody in your neighborhood and you knew a little bit more about them. So you knew what you could trust them with or what you had to offer them. Because of our technology and all the amazing things that have come from it, we're in a much more connected world than we ever have been. If you think about celebrities and how many people you've known, especially in high school, that had a crush on a celebrity, part of the reason we form such deep crushes on celebrities is because our brains think they're part of our tribe. They think that we actually have a connection with that person as if they were sitting right here next to us. And that's just a little piece of the glitch because we don't actually know that person. We fill in the little bits that we don't know from the magazine articles we've read and the movies we've seen with what we expect of them. And then having all these people that are kind of blown into idols, especially on social media where we're seeing all these airbrushed models and all these different sources coming in telling us that we're not good enough when we are beautiful and we are lovable just the way we are. It's a lot to compete with. There was a study recently that showed that one of the biggest predictor of a person suffering from depression in 2 years was how much social media they took in at the time of the survey. And if you took in more than 1 hour a day, you had an increased likelihood of developing a major depressive disorder within 2 years. Just 1 hour. So this thing that was built to help keep us connected is really making us feel so overwhelmed. Our brains are fighting us to be healthy because they are constantly scanning for what's the next threat to our survival, but we don't have threats anymore. And that's an awesome thing because I am so glad that I don't have to worry about my friends getting chased down by a jaguar, but it is a little bit of a glitch in our neurobiology. The next thing I want to talk about is us versus me. When we were in that tribal society, we were able to fit in pretty easily. If we had trouble fitting in, usually it was a conversation with one of the authority figures about what we needed to do to fix that. And many of those leaders were really good at helping us find our place again. We were valued for what we did. That's why so many of us have last names that mean what we did. We have like Shoemaker, and we have names like Smith, and we have all these different names from all over the world that are just different variations of jobs. because that was part of our identity. And then we pass that on to our children. And they might not have necessarily done the same line of work that we did, but then you were still known in your community because of your connection to your parents and what they did. Now that we've separated from that dynamic and we're no longer in such small communities, we're part of a global community now, we have more labels and more different ways to identify ourselves. And that's really hard on teenagers. It can be a really good thing, because sometimes when you find that piece of your identity that you didn't understand before, it really starts to make your life make sense and give your values even stronger meanings. But when you have so many things to explore and do, and so many different people pressuring you to do these different things, those stressors on your thermometer can get pretty high pretty quick. So I imagine, where you're sitting right now, many of you nearing graduation, you're still figuring out who you are and how you're fitting in. And that's part of the stress. So stressors that are unique to emerging adults. Emerging adults is something that we're really just starting to research in the grand scheme of things. We've only got about 10 years of research under our belts on this group, because this group is dealing with something that we haven't historically seen before. Because back in the 70s and 80s, when we were doing all our research about adolescence and what that looked like for stressors on our brain, we saw kids getting more freedom, being able to step out, being able to explore, being able to try new jobs and figure out where they fit within their community and what they identified with in their world. But now we're in school longer. We have to focus more on grades. We have less options for jobs. There's actually, federal laws that prevent us from doing certain types of work or being in the workforce for so long when we're a teenager. Again, these are good things. They can help us learn and grow, but in some ways, it's different. You are many times leaving the home and really being less supervised for the first time at a college level instead of when you were in middle school, like we'd seen 2-3 generations ago with your grandparents and great-grandparents. We're also seeing helicopter parents. And helicopter parents are parents who want their children to be happy so much that they micromanage everything. And while that relationship can be very close, it can also be very stressful to step out for the first time and suddenly have to manage an apartment, manage taking care of your laundry, manage grocery shopping and learning how to cook while trying to build new friends and taking courses without somebody standing behind you reminding you every assignment when it's due. And that thermometer suddenly, because it's hard to make those decisions because you didn't have the opportunity to practice. So what used to be a time of identity exploration just occurring in the teenage years has expanded. And as it's expanded, not only do you have to figure out who you are and the labels and the values that you want to carry forward, you have to figure out how to do it not just in your community, but where you want to live, how you're going to fit into that community, how you're going to find a job in that community, what you need to do to be able to maintain a job in that community and our current economy. And it can get really stressful really quick. So what do we do about that stress? I'm sure many of you have some really good coping skills that you're using already. Talking to a friend, sitting down drinking your favorite drink, stopping to enjoy a meal, wearing shirts that you like and it doesn't really matter what your parents say about them because they're not living in the dorm with you. Finding different ways to connect with those around you. But there are always more tools to learn. As a therapist, I'm constantly learning new ways to cope for my clients, and I love it. Because the more tools we have in our toolbox, the easier it is to handle any project. So I'm going to teach you about one tool tonight. This is called Starfish Breathing. So what you do is you just imagine that your hand is a starfish floating in the ocean. And you take your other hand, and as you go up the side of your finger, you're going to inhale. When you go over the top, you hold the breath, and then when you go down, you exhale. So if anybody wants to do it with me, we're going to practice here. And just that easy, things are a little calmer. And if you're someone who didn't feel a little calmer just from that, that's okay too. Sometimes it takes a little practice, and sometimes our thermometer is just so high that a couple of breaths isn't going to bring it down right away. But if you can practice that exercise just a couple times a week, or if you're really ambitious about it, a couple times a day, then your body responds quicker. And as you learn those deep breaths, you can learn how to control your breathing, slow down your heart rate, and release tension from your muscles and make it a lot easier to move forward throughout the day. The next exercise I'm going to teach you is called a grounding exercise. So when we're depressed, we're stuck in thoughts and memories about the past. When we're anxious, we're worried about what's going to come next in the future. So grounding exercises are a really good way to bring you into the here and now and help you be able to make the decision that is the next right step for you. So I want you to look around and just notice 5 things that you see. Four things you can touch. I reversed them there, sorry. And these things don't have to be comfortable things. They don't have to be enjoyable things. They're just things that are around you. I used this exercise once when I was in the emergency room, and it did a really good job bringing that anxiety down, even though everything I noticed was uncomfortable. 3 things you can hear. 2 things you can smell. And just notice the taste in your mouth if there is any. And that helps bring it all in. So when do I know that I need to seek help? I actually have folders for every one of you that includes 4 different stress assessments. And the reason I chose 4 of them is because 2 of them are about, well, one is about how your body is showing you that you're stressed. One is about how your brain is showing you that you're stressed. One is another stress scale, and the 4th one is how well you're coping with that stress. Because some of you might have a ridiculously high stress thermometer, but some awesome coping skills that make it so that you don't really need any help. Some of you might kind of go the other way. So being able to take those assessments and really give a full look at what's going on in your life can help give you an idea of if there's any conversations you need to be having. The other things on here I have printed out for you in there as well as to when it's a good idea to seek help for you to think about and kind of reflect on over time. I'm sure as you return home for the holidays, stress levels will change. I'm sure as you move on through the year, into the summer, into the next year, and into graduation, some of those things will change. So keep these resources on hand and just every once in a while check in with yourself. What does help look like? Well, help comes in several different forms, and I know these labels are confusing. So I'm going to start from, the ground up here. Talking to a helper. A helper is just someone that you feel safe talking to about mental health with. It can be a teacher that you know is in one of the helping professions, someone who's in nursing or special education or just education in general, someone who's a psychology major, someone who you know might have some resources. Talking to religious affiliates, religious professionals, many of them often have resources as well. As we kind of move on here, because sometimes you might think somebody's a helper, but when you talk to them, you don't get the best feedback, and that can sting a little bit. But as I mentioned before, sometimes these hard conversations, we just need to keep trying. So the next step up would be a counselor. Counselors are people who are trained to be able to help you with a problem that you're having right now. They help with the day-to-day. As we move up a little bit more, there's therapists. Therapists are people who have a little more training to be able to help with disorders that are a little more prevalent on your life because they're bringing in either past trauma or some other struggle that you've been dealing with, learning disabilities, ADHD. Some of you may either personally or have a loved one who has a personality disorder, and therapists can certainly help with dealing with some of that. The next step is a psychologist. Psychologists have a doctoral level of training. Because of the shortage of individuals we have in mental health in the state of Indiana, most psychologists only do testing. They don't do talk therapy or some of the other therapies like a counselor or a therapist would, but they can refer you for that if it's needed. And then talking to a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor who is specialized in mental health care. So they can help with prescribing medications to help with anxiety, depression, different psychological disorders that you might be dealing with. And they can also help with diagnosing through running lab work or doing x-rays. So where do I start? If I know I or my loved one needs help, where do I start? Well, if you're still a student here at the university, when you're thinking that thought, you can call 260-359-4040, and free confidential help is available in the hub. If you're no longer a student or your loved one is the one who needs help, going to bewellindiana.com can give you some excellent resources for dealing with situations in the moment and helping to get connected to resources. If you need free or low cost help while you're transitioning into the workforce, you can go to opencounseling.com or Open Path Collective, and you can join for a small membership fee, and they'll connect you with counselors that are free or very low cost. If you have insurance and you're able to either get your own insurance through work, stay on your parents' insurance, be on state insurance, you can call the number on the back and they'll help connect you to a counselor, one that's in network and will be affordable. If you have specific needs that you want to address, you can go to Psychology Today or goodtherapy.org, or simply go to Google and type in the type of counselor you need. So for example, if you and your partner were having difficulty, you can type in a fair counselor, Fort Wayne, Indiana, or a fair counselor near Huntington, and you'd be able to find some results. If you're finding yourself in a crisis and you want to talk to somebody right away, this should say text line, but the crisis text line of 741-741 is always available. And if for some reason you're uncomfortable having those text messages out there on your phone bill, you can text the word loofah to them and they will wipe it when you're done with the conversation. So they'll help connect you with resources, they'll help talk you through that situation, and then you can move on to the next step. If you're having an immediate medical crisis, where you or a loved one is thinking about suicide or homicide or is behaving so erratically you're afraid that they're going to hurt themselves, call 911 or go to the nearest ER. And remember, even though going to the ER or calling 911 can be scary because that's a big financial piece that people often think about, we can always handle financial situations. Hospitals are very, very helping in a majority of situations with that, but we can't fix someone's life being gone. We can fix finances, we can figure out ways to deal with that, but once they're gone, we can't fix that. All right, and then there are my references mostly for the images there. So we are going to take a short intermission, and then we'll come back with a discussion panel. If you have any questions, feel free to talk to me either in the interim or save them for our meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, we're doing a brief intermission. I'll have those resources that Kelsey talked about. I'll put them up on the stage for you guys, those folders. Be back in like 15. We'll start our panel. Thank you, guys. Hello, everybody. Welcome back from intermission. So we're going to move into our panel. We're going to start with, I'm going to open it up from any questions from you guys in the audience, and then I have some pre-prepared questions too. So we'll start with that. So does anybody have any questions? Oh, and by the way, for people on the live stream, sorry, you can get a chapel credit. If you're watching this on the live stream, just email Rachel Hart 2 talking points from the lecture, and you can get a chapel credit if you're watching this online. Cool. So does anybody have? I'll start with him. I'll hand this to start over here. Over here. Sorry. You've been declared. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? Oh yeah, smart. Go for it.
Guess I get to start. I have the mic. Hello, my name is Lauren Frischman. I am the resident director for Baker and Rausch Halls, as well as our director of student programming on campus.
I am China Presley. I'm the director of intercultural enrichment here at Huntington. Before I came to Huntington, I served the Fort Wayne, Wabash, Huntington communities for about 14 years as a social worker.
My name is Kirsch Cochran. I am the chief of police here at Huntington University. Prior to that, I served for the Fort Wayne Police Department, where I was a crisis intervention team officer, one of very few that specialized in mental health, specifically crises.
I'm Kelsey Darmowchel. I'm a therapist in the Fort Wayne area. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and nationally board certified counselor.
My name is Isaac Barber. I am the Director of Student Success at Huntington.
My name is Kelsey Herber. I'm our head women's volleyball coach and also one of our therapists in counseling services here on campus.
And I'm Dr. Tanner Babb. I teach in psychology, also serve as Associate Academic Dean, and I actually did my internship serving in the area doing what Kelsey's doing, so that was one of my counseling internships working with students at Huntington.
Awesome. So my first question is, I know Kelsey was talking a bit about finding a safe person to talk to, a helper to talk to. How do I, as an HU student, know what faculty or staff members are safe to go to?
I'll first start just being one of our therapists in our counseling services office. Just to give you a little bit of a heads up on what the process looks like, if you do want to get connected with one of our counselors on campus, I would definitely consider our counselors on campus as someone who would be a safe person to go and talk to with whatever you may be struggling with. And so if you're a student, if you go on to the student portal, you can complete a request for counseling form. Those get sent to Martha Smith, who is our director of counseling services, and then she will connect you with a counselor so that you can begin meeting regularly. So those are just the steps for one of the ways, one of the groups of people that you can get connected with.
Okay, this is hard, so more practical, right? Because everyone, regardless of how much they get paid at Huntington, isn't a safe person to talk to. And so for you, you would have to make the call for yourself. If I were to talk to a staff person, a faculty member, or even a student, can this person or has this person actually been trained to deal with this conversation that I'm getting ready to have with them, right? Because you can talk to someone who's an oversharer, right? And so you see that person, I want to talk to you about my issues, but you know that that conversation may go to 6 or 7 different people who also are not trained to handle that conversation. And so when we talk about safe spaces, it's not just a safe space of I feel comfortable having this conversation, but do you also feel comfortable where that conversation is going to go next? That's a conversation you can have for yourself, but also a person in which you can identify this person cares about me in having this conversation. A lot of times with college students specifically, it's I'm in a place in which I can talk about this, so we talk to the first 2 or 3 people who will listen, right? But you know, it's not always about the person who listens, it's about the person who I can actually identify to help me once I'm done processing this, who can advise me on what to do next, or who can advise me on who I should talk to next. Because a lot of times we're great listeners, right? But we may not be able to advise you on what the next steps are. And so when you talk to a person, when you find a person, do I trust this person with whatever information I'm going to give them, as well as whatever advisement they're going to give me after my process to them?
I think, I mean, not quite specifically to here at the university, but just a general thought to take out into the world as far as finding a safe person. I talked a little bit about how when we're in a place where we're open and ready to connect, that we are more lively, our eyes are a little brighter, we're easy to talk about passions with each other. I think if you've got somebody with you that you feel is comfortable like that with you to be open and passionate about, that's a pretty good bet to try to have a conversation there. Like he just said, bearing in mind, not everybody's trained to have that conversation. Not everybody has the energy or the resources. There's a fantastic quote by Mr. Rogers where he says, you know, so many times you hear, don't cry, because that person's uncomfortable with their own feelings, and then they're certainly uncomfortable with yours. Someone who's comfortable with your feelings is going to say, go ahead and cry, I'm here with you. So try to find those people that you think would be safe to show your emotions with, because they're safe with you showing their emotions, if that makes sense.
I just want to say quickly that in the lower level of Livingston is where you will find the department, or the Center for Spiritual Formation and Intercultural Enrichment. And every person in that office I would label as a helper, as what was on the screen earlier. In addition to that, our VP for Spiritual Formation, Arthur Wilson, who brought us into this night, Arthur and then Mark Vincenti, our campus pastor, are both clergy, and so they are safe people to talk to if you have anything that you need to talk about. By their profession, that they have to keep your secrets unless it's something that is going to cause harm to you or others. They have to keep your secrets. So those are good people to talk to and reach out to if you need to talk. If you're just trying to figure out and gauge how far in depth you need to go. I also think that counseling is the best route if you're really trying to figure some things out. But if before you're ready for counseling, you think maybe I should reach out to a helper, those are great people. We're all, that whole crew is ready to help.
All right, and then to go along with that question, just taking it a step further, what can staff and faculty do for somebody struggling with mental health, and what can't they do also?
We can pray for you. I mean, I think each person is skilled differently. So that's a hard question to answer. I mean, I could sit here and tell you what I feel I'm skilled to do. Lauren could probably tell you something else. I mean, we all have different skill sets. We all have different things that we feel like God has equipped us to do. And I think one thing is for certain, I have not yet met a faculty person or a staff person who just automatically says, well, there's nothing I can do for you, right? So everybody that I have met, that I've worked with so far, has at least said, okay, well, I'm willing to listen and figure out where we go from there. So.
Yeah, I will say one neat thing is it depends on what piece of your puzzle needs some help. So, for example, I've had students come in who have been dealing with like a sexual assault prior to them becoming a student, and that case was still being adjudicated. And so I could both provide them some emotional support and help them through it, and then I could also let them know from my training and experience what to expect if there's a deposition, or what to expect at a hearing, or how do we navigate a protective order or something like that. And so that resource is available in my office. But again, like she said, it depends on what kind of help you need. But I would say the diversity presented here, not just visually, but in our expertise, I would say there's probably someone that can help. Or then I would assume that any one of us would go, this isn't my jam particularly, but why don't we go over and talk to Isaac about it, or Kelsey or something like that.
I don't teach here at the university, but I do teach at another school, and often I'll get an email from a student who says that they're struggling and they just need an extension, or a situation has come up and they're not sure what to do. Because I teach psychology classes, sometimes there will be things disclosed in assignments that seem particularly heavy topics. And what I do is I keep a list of available resources on hand to be able to handle just like that. I do my best to give them some space and some grace and forgiveness to within what my university allows. And if we're starting to push on those limits, then I help by taking them over to student support and getting them the extensions or paperwork they need to be able to take the time that they need to rest and heal.
I'll just hold down. Not anything to say.
Bab, did you have anything to say?
I think when you look at faculty and staff, I mean, we have a collection of faculty and staff that are caring, who empathize with students, who want the best for you. But when it comes to particular needs, I think the best thing that faculty and staff can do is help connect you with, whether it's counseling, ministry. And part of that is when you're seeking out counseling, when you really need support, there's a couple things that you really require. One is safety, and the other is clarity. A lot of safety comes from confidentiality. It's knowing that if I share this, this is not going to be discussed in any other forum. I have a place to get some feedback about this. Clarity is the other thing. When you really need to sort through problems, walk through problems, you need somebody who's really trained to make it about you, who knows the skills to do that. And a lot of our faculty and staff are great, but they don't have those well-developed skills. And so I think when you're looking at, hey, I'm struggling with normal sort of life problems, I'm stressed out about assignments, life, I'm feeling a little down, having a cup of coffee with a faculty or staff member can be great. They'll meet those needs. When it's something that's really kind of derailing your life, it's not a bad thing to go to them, but this is why we have counseling services, why we have ministry services, is there's people who will help you get to the root of those things a lot faster, and in an environment that's probably going to provide you a lot more safety and security.
All the way to the other side, awesome. Well, I will not reiterate all the great things that everyone already said that I was thinking as well. But focusing back on the piece of what faculty and staff cannot do for you is we cannot take ownership of your mental health for you. And there's so many, I mean, again, people here who just care about you, whether that's your RD like me, or our student staff, our RAs, or our sojourners from our office in Livingston that China mentioned. Everybody cares, but we can't do it for you, and we're here to do it with you and walk alongside you and provide whatever help and resources we can. And an analogy I tell my RAs all the time and encourage them to do, we can set the table for people, we can give you the resources, we can help guide you, we can sit down with you, but we can't force you to eat. So if you aren't seeking out opportunities to talk with people or resources, or you're not asking questions or taking initiative and that ownership for yourself, then we won't know that you are struggling, or we won't know how best to help you and serve you and care for you if you're not taking that first step, which is really scary and really hard and can take a lot of, bravery and vulnerability. And I totally see that, but that's one thing that we cannot do that I'm, passionate about communicating.
Awesome, thank you. So you've all been in our shoes before. You know what it's like. It's a lot. Do you have any, if you could talk about a little bit your experience and what advice or any wisdom you have to impart on becoming an adult and managing stress and learning how to deal with these things for the first time?
You don't need to have all the answers. It's okay to still be learning. It's okay to make mistakes so that you can figure it out and figure out who to reach out to learn what you need to know. Our brains aren't actually fully developed until we're about 24 years old. And even then, they're still very resilient. We still have a lot of capacity for learning and growing. If you're dealing with something like ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, it can take up to age 30 for your brain to be completely developed. So mistakes are going to happen. There's going to be things that you just weren't prepared for, and it's okay to feel like you're struggling a bit. I think that's kind of the biggest piece about becoming an adult, but also remembering that when those big feelings happen, they're not forever. They're going to crash over you like a wave, and it might not be comfortable, but it will pass, especially if you're willing to let it.
Yeah, I like how you asked it, because it makes it sound like we have it figured out.
You don't? That's
crazy. I had a counseling session today, so I definitely don't have it figured out. And I share that to say that I'm sure there are people up here as adults that still have a little bit of anxiety into walking into a counseling appointment or going to counseling and trying to figure out our own mental health. I was joking down here, man, I feel so unbelievably unqualified to sit on this panel because I'm still working through my own stuff. And so one thing that I will say is a huge regret of mine is not seeking any help while I was a student here and trying to fight it for the longest time. And I wish I wouldn't have waited until adulthood to walk into a counselor's office or let my doctor know that I have extremely high anxiety, So if you're dealing with that now, yeah, it's not going to magically go away. I wish I had better news for you. But there's a whole nother set of stresses once you graduate. And so, yeah, if you need to talk to someone, just go do it now. Create that good habit now. You're creating all these other good habits, right? Like good sleeping habits, good eating habits, and all the things we try to drill into your head your freshman and sophomore year. Man, take care of yourself. Be good to yourself now, and then that'll keep going into adulthood.
Ditto to everything you just said. But also, what I try to, so I know I don't look old enough to have parented children older than you. And technically I'm not, but God gave me the opportunity to do that. And one of the things that I have learned in being a step parent to older, now adults, it's helping them figure out, and this was helpful for me. When you're at that stage where you're trying to figure out what are my next steps, it is scary, right? You're coming to college to kind of give you this buffer to figure out, I have 4 years at least to figure out what I'm about to go do for the rest of my life. Well, you're not going to do that for the rest of your life, I promise you that. We're constantly trying to figure it out as we're going along. And then our desires change as we get older, as we get more experience. Then all of a sudden we get exposure to different things, and then things change. It does not have to be scary. It can be exciting. If you try to prepare yourself, what I try to do is always think about my plan B before I figure out my plan A. So my plan B is my fallback plan if plan A doesn't work out. And if I got plan B figured out, then I'm solid, right? Because if plan A falls through, then at least I know what's going to catch me if I fail. And failures don't have, I think I said this in my chapel message. a lot of times we have a hard time figuring out how to fail because we don't watch anybody around us fail. A lot of us who have gone through it already, we hide our failures, and we don't expose you all to seeing what it looks like when we fail. Well, guess what? Us being in front of you today is a lot of failure beforehand. We probably would, none of us would be here had we not failed so many times, right? And so failure does not have to be a bad thing. So I always say, the plan B, figure that part out first to ease your mind, just in case plan A never comes through or never works the way that you want it to work.
Trying to really boil it down because there's so many things that I could say. And kind of to Kirsch's point, just talk, whether that's with a therapist, with a friend, with a family member, or your roommate, whomever. And I always like to joke with students, counseling for you is free right now. I pay $60 every time I go to counseling. Like, take advantage of it, But the thing about that too is, and I think someone already mentioned it, I don't know if it was Kelsey or someone else, sometimes you're not ready to talk about things yet, and I know, it took a lot of time for me to talk about some things after I graduated from college, and that's okay too. So don't feel like you're like, oh, what would I even talk about if I went to counseling? That might mean you're not ready for it yet, and that's okay. But we want you to feel like that's a good, safe, healthy option that doesn't have stigma attached to it, that would be available for you if and when needed. But I think the biggest thing when I was a student here at HU, I felt so alone. I felt like I was the only one who felt like this or was doing this or was, just putting all these expectations and pressures on myself, and I was not alone in that, but I think there's so many things that try to isolate us. Shame tries to isolate us. Our leadership roles or our jobs, like those are isolating to think maybe we're the only ones doing this or experiencing this. Or, I talk with students who have graduated and they say, I feel so alone, or I feel like I'm the only one experiencing this because maybe I have this job versus that job, maybe because I'm living in this area versus that area, maybe because I'm in grad school and they're not, but no one is alone, and there's always somebody who can empathize with you or always somebody who can relate with you in some way. But again, back to what I said before, it takes vulnerability to share that, and it takes that bravery to say like, oh, I'm struggling with this. And then someone can have the, match you in your vulnerability and say, oh, me too. And there's so much freedom in that. And so be vulnerable. Mic drop. I'm not going to drop it, but anyone else?
So one thing I'd say, one of the best decisions I made in college was going to see a counselor here at Huntington. And my parents were going through a separation. I was really stressed out. I was working a ton. And I was a psychology student. So I'm like, I should be able to deal with this. I should be able to handle this. And it was kind of that realization that if I'm a psychology student and I'm not okay with going to counseling, I need to readjust kind of my perception and priorities. And honestly, it was amazing. Going to a counselor, there is just no other relationship like it where you can just share every thought, every feeling, kind of back up the dump truck and just dump everything out, and they just take it. And it's gone. And you just feel this immediate weight lifted, because sharing with your friends or your family, it's not usually like that. They're not trained to have the capacity to just take things in like that. And when you go to a good counselor, they're trained to do that well. And it is amazing. And I think I went for 4 or 5 sessions, and I just felt so amazingly better. And I got some real insights I would not have gotten from talking to my friends. And what Lauren said, I cannot emphasize that enough. It is free. Like, I know when I was counseling, it was like $40 to $120 a session. And so if there's things you need to work through, if you know, like, ask for help. Like, take advantage of that. Even if you just go for a session and you're just like, I just want to kind of get this out and talk about this, it can be so freeing and can help move you forward to a place where you feel much better.
One other thing that I want to kind of add on to that is that there are many, many excellent counselors in our area. There are also sometimes counselors that just don't fit your needs, and that's okay. Sometimes you need to talk to one or two different people, or 3 or 4, before you find someone who really understands what you're going through the way that you need them to. So if you go to counseling and it's just not working, don't give up. Keep trying. Ask to talk to another counselor. Another thing that I'd like to add is many of our struggles and our stressors come from living a life that's not aligned with our values. So if you're not sure what your values are, and that's perfectly normal at your stage in life to not know what your values are, there are lots of ways you can explore that. You can talk with friends, you can talk with clergy, you can talk with your family, you can go online and type value sort activity, and there's all sorts of ones that'll come up. But if you know what your values are, and you're able to think about that when you face a hard choice, it makes your decisions going forward a lot easier and a lot more healthy.
Yeah, that's actually kind of along the lines of what I wanted to add. I think I would be remiss if I did not say sometimes when we're feeling down, maybe we need to do a check where our spiritual life is at. I think in the times that I have felt the most, I felt like I was in the darkest places, it was when I was very disconnected from God. And I felt purposeless because I was disconnected from God, the author of my life. I am not afraid to sit here in front of people that may not believe the way that I believe. Because of my experience, I can tell you I'm typically a very cerebral person, and faith does not make sense to people who are cerebral. But faith, my relationship with God has become everything. My drive for life, my drive for relationship, my drive for everything that I do. And so if you are in a dark space, I would say do a spiritual check as well. It's not, mental health is very important. There are some people who need to take medication. There are some people who don't need to take medication. Some people need to exercise. There's all kinds of ways in which we can realign, readjust our mental health. Our spiritual walk is also one of those things that we need to take stock of. And so if you feel like you're in a dark space, ask yourself, when was the last time I talked to God? If you find yourself here at Huntington in particular, and you feel very purposeless, if you have any idea of what you think you were put on this earth to do, ask yourself, are you doing anything that aligns with that? Case in point, I talked to somebody recently who said that they believe that their purpose in life is to work with children. But they weren't sure if this is where they wanted to be right now. And I asked them, are you doing anything that aligns with working with children right now in your time here at Huntington? And they said no. I said, well, maybe you want to try that first before deciding to leave. Because if we're not walking in our purpose, then we're not going to feel like we're supposed to be anywhere. So you can leave here because you think that this is the problem, and then you're going to go somewhere else, and you're going to feel very empty and very lonely there too, because you're not doing anything that aligns with what you think you were put on this earth to do.
Thank you. I think we're wrapping up. I'll do one more question and before we head out, but I think going in, that just taking everything you guys have said, I don't know how to phrase this, but we're all starting this transition. Maybe we've already started it, maybe it's coming up, this transition from adolescence to adulthood. And that's like a huge stressor on mental health. What advice do you have, generally speaking?
Yeah, a lot of times it's leaning into it. And so we get nervous by the transition, or it becomes like so unfamiliar to us that we don't actually want to participate into the transition. When we talk about lean into it, it's a process, right? And so there's a step one, step two, step three. And a lot of times, especially cognitively for college students, we don't want to participate in the steps it takes to get to become an adult, or honestly to take the steps that to get to the place that we want to get to, right? So in preschool they teach us that you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up, right? And so we start to learn the steps of what it takes to become a doctor, or learn the steps of what it takes to become a teacher or a successful teacher. And it's just like, I just want to become that, but we don't lean into the transition. And that's where we go AWire a lot when it comes to becoming an adulthood, right? Kobe Bryant once told a guy, just like, shoot 100 free throws. He was like, okay, well, I missed more of the free throws than I took. And he's like, well, did you become a better free throw shooter? He was like, yes. But he didn't like missing more free throws than he took. And so he just kept taking free throws and free throws until all of a sudden he's just like, well, I don't care as much about the free throws that I made, but I'm becoming a better free throw shooter. And that's a lot of times what it takes when it comes to a positive transition into adulthood. All right, I made the mistakes, but leaning into it, did I learn from those mistakes? Did I learn from the things that help me propel me into, whether it be a career, whether it just be positive mental health, whether it be Tanner Babb's abnormal psychology class, right? How can I lean into the transition as much as possible? A lot of it is taking care of yourself, taking care of your mental health, but also acknowledging that, like, this is a process. Let me keep taking the next step, the next step, the next step, until eventually I meet my goal, right? But even when you meet the goal, you end up finding more goals. And so that's why it's important to lean into the transition, because, like, you'll never be satisfied by this job, right? I got the job at Huntington, and now I have a bunch of goals that I need to complete. And so you always get more goals, but it's more about the transition itself, and not necessarily I want to do this, or I want to be this, or I'm going to have 5-star mental health or anything like that. It's about, all right, let me lean into this as much as possible, and that promotes positive steps moving forward.
I think great things have been set up here. Great advice. Thank you. One thing I just would like to add, and this is part of my personal journey, and as some of you have mentioned, I'm a counselor and go to my own counseling, and so it is something that I think is extremely beneficial for anyone. But the one additional piece I want to share is that sometimes you have to accept the grace that is already sitting there before you. That's a gift. That's just waiting to actually be accepted. And that was something that I went through in my life, where I remember having several conversations in this one particular phase of my life with people about how, I love to give grace to other people, like whoever it is, I believe that that's there for them, but for some reason I don't give myself grace. And then I remember having a class in grad school, one specific class that just rocked my world in terms of how I viewed grace. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, Kelsey, you're not giving yourself grace because you're not the giver of grace. That ultimately does come from the Lord. And the reality is, it's not that you haven't given yourself grace. That grace has been sitting right in front of you this whole entire time. It's just a matter of saying, okay, I'll receive that today. And I want to share that just because if you're anything like me, you're very hard on yourself. You have high expectations and maybe even chase after perfection sometimes, and can be very frustrated when you fall short. And I think especially in this life transition, there is so much to learn. There are so many ways to grow, and I just want to encourage you today that I hope that each of you can walk out of here just accepting a little bit of that grace that's sitting before you, that it's okay to not have it all figured out right now, and you're on the journey, and that journey ends up being something beautiful that God can use later to impact others, just like each of us have had a failure that's led us to this point to be able to share where we're at.
It's hard to follow that, but I would definitely say it's never too late to develop a sense of humor. And when you look at things that help you get through life, having a sense of humor, being able to see the lighter side of life is so important. If you met me my freshman year of college versus my senior year of college, I would have looked like a qualitatively different person because somewhere in there I developed a sense of humor. I learned to laugh at things, and it did really make everything so much better. And part of it is you learn to see your faults from a different perspective. You learn to be okay with who you are. If you take yourself so seriously all the time, the reality is you are going to become an adult. Like, you're going to graduate, it's going to happen. And reality's not always going to change, but your perception of reality can change. And humor does that a lot for you when you're ridiculous or you make mistakes or you fail. Learning to laugh at yourself helps you get through a lot.
Okay, I'll try to keep this brief. First of all, we didn't get to this question, so I'm going to say this. As I was thinking about it, there was a question that you wrote to us that said something about regret and how do we deal with regrets. And the first thought I had was, because I try to live my life in a way that I don't have regrets. I'm very intentional about that. I believe that regrets are unseized opportunities. So whenever we go through something and we say, man, I wish I would have, no, that's an opportunity to change that around. It's an opportunity to live differently so that that doesn't happen again. Instead of looking at it as, man, I wish that wouldn't have happened, or I wish I hadn't done that. I always see as, even those things that we say, I wish I wouldn't have. Okay, well, now going forward, what can I do with that? Well, how can I change what happens in the future based off of what I didn't like about that past? So don't live your life with regret. Live your life on purpose. Be intentional. Try not to allow fear to rule you, because that's when life starts to happen to you instead of you living life and making life happen for you. Any other catchphrases I can think of? I don't know. But no, I think, as you're stepping on into life and you're trying to figure out what's coming up next, don't live your life with regret. Live your life intentionally. And if something happens along the way that you don't like, turn it into a positive. Turn it into something that you do like. And it's very possible to do that. And I will add to everybody else talking about how important counseling is. Counseling saved my life. And I was the person who was always everybody else's counselor growing up. And so I learned to close up. I learned to fix everything on my own. I learned to just resolve the problem, just keep pushing through. And I don't have time to deal with the stress. I don't have time to deal with how I'm breaking down. It's not an option for me. It's where I was always at. It's not an option to break down until I got to the place where if I continue this way, I honestly do not know what's going to happen next. I have no more control. I got to a place where I would rather be dead than to continue living life the way that I was living. And thank God, I found a way to get counseling during the middle of a pandemic. And I sat in my car and did my sessions on my phone while I was going through a divorce in the middle of a pandemic. I was living separated with the person that I was getting a divorce from. My stepkids were getting old and moving out. I had a young child at home, and she needed me. And I had to get my finances in order. I had to figure out what my next steps were going to be. I was changing a job. I was trying to sell a house. I was doing all of these things coming out of a job that I hated. Not the job itself, but how I was being treated at my job. All of these things were coming down on me, and got to the place where my capacity to hold anymore, it was like if you think about a mental closet. I hope one day we have a conversation where I can tell you about my Marie Kondo theory on life. My mental closet could hold no more. Everything was busting out. And counseling saved my life because I found the counselor that knew what I was saying when I wasn't saying it, because she had also gone through something very similar. And when she was able to see what I wasn't saying, she pulled it out of me. I had the ugliest cry I ever had in my life, but literally saved my life. And so get over the fear of the what if, and push yourself to allow yourself to be vulnerable, allow yourself to do the ugly cry. You don't have to carry it all on your own. We were not, as human beings, we were not intended to live life alone. We were not intended to be silos. So if you have been put in a position where everything is on you because everybody around you needs you, you need to find somebody who will allow you to put that on them. I think I'm gonna stop there.
That was great. I guess I'll snowball on top of that a little bit and say, find community, because again, you can't do it alone, right? And so you need a community, you need friends, whether that's a church community, whether it's a small group, a gym, I don't know, but find community. Even if it feels awkward, even if it feels like you're putting yourself out there like a first date moment, with a friend, do it anyway and push yourself to not operate and do things by yourself. And then kind of my flip side to that, also be comfortable being alone, because it might take some time to establish a community, or you might not, you might graduate and not be engaged. Shocker. Or you might find yourself living single for a period of time, your whole life. I don't know. I'm almost 28 and I'm still single, and it's great and hard and great and still hard. But I am not alone, and I don't live my life by myself, and you don't have to live your life by yourself either. And again, it can be uncomfortable and it can be hard, but push yourself to meet people and have new experiences, because I think one of the best things about being, graduated from college, you have freedom for the first time in your life. You're not in school unless you go to grad school. You're done. You can go where you want to go. You can be who you want to be. You can be around who you want to be around. And there's so much freedom and opportunity within that. And it can be really daunting, or you can choose to make it exciting, and you can choose to make it your own adventure and figure out where the Lord wants you to be and how he's going to guide you, and how you're going to impact the world for him. So make it fun. It is scary, but it's kind of like a mental game too. You see what you choose to see almost. I just got 2 cats this week because I can. It's great. Have fun, and you might not cook your chicken right the first time, and you might have to call your mom or Google it, and that's okay. You're not a failure, and you're not stupid, and you might get into a job and you might hate it after a month. That's also okay, because you don't have to keep doing it. You can quit and try something else. Don't box yourself in. Don't put unrealistic expectations or pressures on yourself. And just have a good time with it, because this is your life and it's worth living. And as long as you're doing it safe and healthy, and obviously all those caveats, you're not breaking the law or whatever, but it should be fun and exciting, and if you feel like it doesn't feel like that, because again, we're talking about mental health tonight. If your mental, emotional health, or physical health is keeping you from feeling like that, then again, full circle moment, bring it back. Go talk to a counselor, talk to a clergy, talk to a friend or family, because the scariness shouldn't overshadow the excitement. And if you find that it does, then let's talk about it. So I will leave that at that.
When I was lecturing, I briefly talked about how our sensory information comes into our body and our brain processes it, and then we do something with that. I'd like to break that down, or flesh it out, I guess, a little bit more. When our sensory information comes in, we create a story in our mind, and that story is our thought. And then, depending on what the thought is, it turns into a feeling. Now, no feeling that you will ever have is wrong. No feeling that you ever have is a bad feeling. What you do with that feeling turns into your behavior, and people sometimes have bad behaviors, or like we just brought up about don't want to break the law and things like that. But if you're noticing that you're feeling a lot of shame or frustration or discomfort with your feelings, I think you should take a little bit of that grace that's sitting in front of you and recognize that we have been given over 200 different emotions for a very important reason, to help us survive and to help us become what we're supposed to be. So those feelings, while they can be very uncomfortable, are not bad or wrong. We can change our thoughts, we can play with those. Counselors are great at helping you learn how to do that. Talking with a close friend is great at helping you be able to kind of reprocess the information and see things maybe a little more clearly or in a different way. And we can choose how to live to our values and our actions so that we have less regrets. But those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all separate pieces, and they're all an important part of being able to evaluate yourself and how you're doing and how you're connecting and how you're belonging. And, no matter what happens tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now, you are all worthy, you are all enough, and you are all lovable, and you can all love.
All right, thank you guys. Let's give it up for our awesome panel. So that wraps up our night. Thanks you guys for coming out. It was awesome. Thank you to everybody up here. It was so awesome to hear from you guys. You had some great things to say. So, did everybody in the room get the chapel credit? Awesome. All right, that's it. Thank you.